For many centuries in the Ferghana Valley of Central Asia, there existed a thriving community of Ionian Greeks. The question must be asked, how did these people come to be so far from their historic homelands of Asia Minor and the Aegean Sea? In 499 BCE, the Ionian colonies of Asia Minor staged a revolt against their rulers, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. The revolt was rooted in resentment for the Persian ruling class that controlled their city-states. While the revolt was quickly thwarted by the Persians, the consequences would be felt for generations. Most notably, as punishment for their support of the revolt, the Persian Empire declared a war against the Greeks. The Persians still had to deal with their dissenters and revolting populaces. They decided to deport some of the Ionians to the furthest corners of the empire, tearing these people away from both their culture and potential allies in a future rebellion. Over the vast territory of the empire, the Persians deported several Greek populations to the Ferghana Valley, creating a new Greek culture in the region that would grow on its own, forging a new identity. While the Greeks in Ferghana were far away from their homeland, they were never truly isolated. Evidence, in the form of imitation Athenian coins discovered by archaeologists, would suggest that there was still some contact with the homeland. During his conquest of the Achaemenid Empire, Alexander of Macedon placed the northeastern borders of his empire in the Ferghana Valley. During his conquest, he had discovered the exiled communities of Ionians. He sought to increase the Greek influence and presence in the land he had only just conquered, and as such, he founded a number of new cities, most famously Alexandria Escate, or Alexandria the Furthest. Alexander moved as many as 30,000 people into the valley. Many of these settlers were veterans of Alexander's army, and these would come to become the ruling elite of the future kingdom of Bactria. After Alexander's death, and the collapse of his empire, the Ferghana population came under the rule of the Seleucid Empire, administered by the satrap of Bactria. During his reign, the empire's power had begun to weaken. Diodotus, the satrap, decided to defect and claimed independence for his people. This was the beginning of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, and over several generations, it would expand into the Indus Valley, claiming lands once claimed by the previous Seleucid rulers. The Yuezhi, a nomadic people, were expelled from their homeland by the Xiongnu Confederacy. As they were migrating, they began a feud with the Wusun people, which expelled them from the Lil River Valley. They finally settled in Bactria, cutting off contact between the different regions of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, eventually conquering and ruling over the whole of Bactria by 125 BCE. The Greeks of Ferghana eventually became vassals of the Yuezhi. When ambassadors of the Han dynasty travelled to Ferghana, they were confused by the culture of the valley. They referred to the Ferghana people as the Dayuan, translating to Great Ionians. They, like their Greek ancestors, loved wine, a delicacy unavailable to the Chinese. The horses of the Ferghana Valley were of Persian origin, bigger and stronger than the horses native to China. Sima Qian, in his work, The Records of the Grand Historian of China, details an account of the Dayuan, as seen through the eyes of a Han envoy. The region around Dayuan makes wine out of grapes, the wealthier inhabitants keeping as much as 10,000 or more piculs stored away. It can be kept for as long as 20 or 30 years without spoiling. The people love their wine, and the horses love their alfalfa. This report made Emperor Wu of the Han very interested in both Ferghana and the nearby regions of Parthia. He saw the goods that were made in the valley as unlike anything else he had ever seen. The horses of Ferghana would give him an advantage against the Xiongnu menace. The emperor gave the horses special attention and decided that his empire must have them in order to defeat the Xiongnu. The Son of Heaven, on hearing all this reasoned thus: Ferghana and the possessions of Bactria and Parthia are large countries, full of rare things, with a population living in fixed abodes, and given to occupations somewhat identical with those of the Chinese people, but with weak armies, and placing great value on the rich produce of China. Emperor Wu commissioned embassies to acquire more horses. These embassies would reach as far as Syria, still under Seleucid control. This would, in effect, found the first Silk Road, connecting trade across Eurasia for centuries. The Han, however, were unsuccessful in acquiring the Dayuan horses. A series of mutual disagreements led to the death of a Han ambassador, followed by the confiscation of his payment for the horses. This news soon reached Emperor Wu. He was furious that a state like the Dayuan, which he perceived as weak, would not give him the goods he wanted. He felt that the only way to acquire what he wanted would be by force. In 104 BCE, Wu sent an army of 30,000 soldiers and 6,000 horsemen towards the Dayuan kingdom. This effort would be led by Li Guangli, a general favoured by Emperor Wu. However, the expedition was futile, and after 2 years, the mission to conquer the Dayuan had proven unsuccessful. Li, in fact, never made it as far as the Dayuan capital, Ershi, as his army constantly entered petty fights with local leaders. Emperor Wu, however, refused to accept defeat. Immediately, he sent Li back to the Dayuan kingdom, this time with double the soldiers and up to 30,000 horsemen. The previous conquest had been mired by supply shortages, ultimately contributing to their defeat. This time, Wu made sure they were accompanied by as many as 120,000 oxen, donkeys, and camels. Li's emboldened army began a siege on Ershi. In just 40 days, Li's army had destroyed part of the outer wall, damaging Ershi's water supply. The Ershi nobility knew that further resistance would only end in certain death. They decided the king of Dayuan, Wugua, was to be killed. Wugua was decapitated by a group of nobles, and his head was sent to Li. As a gesture of goodwill, all the Ferghana horses the empire could have wanted were finally handed to the Han. Li appointed a noble that was not only part of the group that killed Wugua, but had shown kindness towards the Han in more peaceful times. He appointed Maikai as the new king of Dayuan, but the rest of the local nobility resented Li's choice. Maikai was soon assassinated by the nobles who helped him kill Wugua. Wugua's brothers, Changfeng, was chosen to be the next Dayuan king. Despite his close relation to the warmongering king, he had no interest in displeasing Emperor Wu. Notably, Changfeng sent his own son as hostage to the Han court. Emperor Wu responded positively, sending Dayuan gifts of his own. This would mark the end of the Dayuan conflict. Finally, this led to the reconnection of Chinese contact to the west. This connection would now be permanent and would have an impact on civilizations, both west and east, for generations to come. A new era of trade and commerce had begun. The Silk Road was now open. As always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe for more great content. Every subscriber really does help. If you're feeling extra generous, feel free to check out the Patreon link in the description below.